I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Patrick Harvie to speak to and move the amendment in his name.
Thank you. It's nice to be given such a warm welcome. I appreciate it very much. Presiding officer, if we are at the beginning of potentially 2 years of debate on the independence question again, I think it's important that we recognise the mixed feelings that exist. I'm sure I'm not the only member who's seen angry emails on both sides of the debate telling me that an independence referendum is an absolute priority or something that must be opposed absolutely. I've seen keyboard warriors on both sides. I've also spoken face-to-face to many people who remain as yet unconvinced or who have mixed feelings. But equally, we have to acknowledge that there are a great many people in Scotland who believe, whether reluctantly or with enthusiasm, that the future of Scotland has to be decided not by one parliament or the other, or by one government or the other, but by the people who live here. Now, before our political future was thrown into turmoil 9 months ago, most independence supporters I know understood that this was more likely to be again a long-term aspiration, and we're going to build that case over that long term, and that included my own party. And we suggested one means by which the issue could be revisited. But in assessing what the will of the people means, as so many people are keen to use that phrase, yes, we have to acknowledge that 2014 was an expression of the will of the people, but so was 2016. And the 62% who voted to remain inside the European Union, that is also an expression of the will of the people that must be respected.
I'm very grateful to Mr Harvie. May I ask him the same question I asked Nicola Sturgeon? Can he tell me what assessment he has done of the will of the Scottish people in 2017?
Patrick Harvie.
Do they want or not?
The two clearest recent expressions of the will of the people are 55% voting to remain part of the UK 2.5 years ago and 62% voting to remain part of the European Union just 9 months ago. And if the UK government had shown any interest in reconciling those two positions, then we might not be where we are today.
Ruth Davidson.
I thank Patrick Harvie for giving way, because I know he's just taken an intervention. But on the very point that he raises, will he address and acknowledge that the question in 2016 was about the UK staying part of the European Union? It said nothing about Scotland as anything different. And will he also acknowledge that there are thousands of Scots, including many in this chamber, who are furious that their vote to remain has been appropriated as some sort of vote for independence when it was no such thing. No such thing.
There are such people, and there are also those who are equally furious that their vote no in 2014 is being taken as an excuse to take us out of the European Union against our will. It is, presiding officer, absurd to suggest that we should not respond to and react to the situation and the fundamentally changed circumstances we find ourselves in. Ruth Davidson a few minutes ago said, don't just say a big Tory did it and ran away. Well, good grief, I wish they would, but they're dragging us with them. That's the problem. One more.
Neil Findlay.
If at some point Scotland was to leave the EU, and under his plans, should there be another EU referendum if Scotland is ever to seek to go back in?
Patrick Harvie.
I'm perfectly open to that debate when the time comes. The question here is whether we seek a Section 30 order to argue, as my party did 5 months ago in October, as we took that decision to our party members to ask whether they supported the call for a Section 30 order, and they did, and I was happy to vote with them. Look, the situation is changed not only by the EU referendum result, but by everything the UK government has done with it. The recklessness of holding that referendum to resolve their internal squabbles, their utter lack of a plan, astonishing to be told by Ruth Davis now that there shouldn't be a referendum till people know what they're voting for, after we've seen what happened with the utter lack of a plan of what to do next in the EU referendum and the disrespect shown to Scotland since then. The UK government is using a narrow UK-wide majority not only to ignore their own commitments to the single market, as I mentioned earlier, very clearly, 5 or 6 times on the very same pages as the commitment to hold that referendum on their manifesto, commitments to stay in and protect the single market, but also prominent Leave campaigners. Daniel Hannan from the Tory party. Absolutely nobody is talking about threatening our place in the single market. Owen Paterson MP, only a madman, his language, presiding officer. Owen Paterson's language would never be mine on any subject. Only a madman, he said, would actually leave the market. Nigel Farage, Matthew Elliott, Aaron Banks and others. And look here, Ruth Davison as well, not just during the EU referendum debate, but after the result was in. I want to stay in the single market, yes, even if the consequence of that is retaining free movement of labour, yes. I gave her credit for that at the time, and I think her abandonment of that position is disgraceful. Whether you believe, presiding officer, in a deregulated free market, or, as I do, if you place value on the raft of social, environmental and economic regulations which have come from the European Union, been achieved there, and which protect our quality of life, the argument about how a single market works, about what it means, are critical. And it must include a shared approach to regulation and to freedom of movement. We've already heard, and will continue to hear, mealy-mouthed terms like access to the single market, access to the single market. It cannot be taken seriously, that kind of language, because it won't mean access for people deciding where they want to move to work. It will mean access only for business. If you're not free to decide, unimpeded, where you wish to sell your labour, you're not in a single market. So if anyone is to be accused of breaking promises today, it's the Tory party in both parliaments. Presiding officer, the Green Amendment talks of the terms in which this Parliament should set the franchise and the timing. Young voters and citizens of other EU countries were deliberately excluded from the vote last year by the UK government. We should not be satisfied at that. Neither group was expected to be particularly pro-independence in 2014, but we all agreed they had a right to take part, to determine the future of the country that they live in. Those who have chosen to come here from other EU countries in particular have been treated in the shabbiest way possible by the UK government. Their lives, their careers, their contribution to our society and the future of their families treated as playthings. I think even those who hold an affection for the UK as a political union or for Britishness as an identity must surely look at the way the UK government is treating our friends, neighbours and colleagues and be ashamed. In relation to the Labour and Liberal Democrat amendments, they both, I'm sorry to say, sound like a bit of wishful thinking, a fantasy of a federal UK that simply doesn't exist. The idea of Scotland's strong place in a federal Britain which doesn't exist. Labour have chosen to play the Gordon Brown card pretty early this time around. I wonder what they're holding back for the final weeks this time. And as for the Liberal Democrats, yes, indeed.
Kezia Dugdale.
I understand that Patrick Harvie will spend the next 2 years campaigning for independence, but can he tell us, will he spend all of his time doing that, or will he make the case for powers that we know are coming back from Brussels to come to this place?
Patrick Harvie.
I am not resigned to being taken out of the European Union against the will of the people of Scotland, and today's debate is about holding the line against that. As for the Liberal Democrats, presiding officer, at UK level, they're going around kidding on that they're the only pro-EU party left, while here in Scotland, they want the Westminster Parliament to block our only remaining path to EU membership. And as for the Conservative amendment, it seems bizarre to suggest that the Scottish Government must work together with the UK when it takes two to tango. UK ministers have blanked Scotland entirely in this process, ruling out negotiations to respect the way Scotland voted. Theresa May promised to develop a shared approach with all the devolved administrations before moving forward with Article 50. We can now see how empty that promise was. And finally, presiding officer, on the question of timing. The idea of delaying this until after 2019, after we've been given the opportunity to see how our new relationship with Europe is working, it fundamentally misrepresents leaving the EU as something good instead of the active political wreckage that it is. Autumn 2018 will be after the negotiation concludes, when there is clarity about the arrangements. A deal negotiated by a UK government Scotland didn't choose, with an EU institution on which Scotland is no longer represented, about Brexit, which Scotland didn't vote for either, and then a period of ratification by every other European country, that would leave the future of Scotland in the hands of everybody else in the whole of Europe. The citizens of Scotland, the only people voiceless in that process. I don't think that we can accept that. I won't vote for it, and I move the amendment in my name.